Hello everyone, and welcome to a new educational chess game. I'm going to start with a pawn to e4, and I'm playing against a player rated 2012. He replies with c5, the Sicilian Defense. I play knight to f3, and he plays the pawn to e6. So I'm going to play this push to d4. And now I don't want to recapture with the queen because I would lose the tempo and development to knight c6, so I'll recapture with the knight on d4, and he quickly plays the pawn to a6. So he's adopting a rather flexible structure where he'll be looking for b5 pushes. d5 pushes, I need to try to prevent all that. I'm thinking about playing c4 myself, which is what's called the Maroczy bind. That means I'll have the pawns on c4 and e4, which will control the d5 square. This comes from the player Geza Marocci, who theorized this pawn structure against the Sicilian. And that's what I'm going to do. c4. My opponent plays queen to c7. He's putting pressure on the c4 pawn, but the bishop is defending it. I'm definitely going to play knight to c3 to develop. Knight to f6 is played. Sometimes opponents try to play bishop to b4 to pin the knight on c3 and try to put the e4 pawn in danger. I could play a3 myself to prevent bishop to b4, but that's rather passive. I think it's perfectly possible to play bishop to e2, but I have to admit I don't really know how to respond to bishop to b4. I prefer to play a3. Let's play positionally. I play a3, I prevent bishop to b4, and we'll see what he's prepared. This move will certainly take him out of his opening knowledge. Because I'm taking myself out of my own opening knowledge with a 3, we'll look at the analysis after each instructional game. I suggest an analysis to see what mistakes were made in the opening. Here I play a 3. Well, it's certainly not the best, but it does prevent bishop to b4. He plays b6. He's looking to put his bishop on b7. Still aiming to attack e4, you can see he wants to attack the e4 pawn. He wants to provoke the f3 push so that I weaken my kingside castling. Because after castling kingside, that diagonal will be weak. I could play bishop to d3, but that takes away my ability to control the d-file. I don't really like the move bishop to d3, but maybe that's what I have to play. Bishop to d3, and if he plays bishop to c5 to attack my knight, maybe bishop to e3, maybe retreat my knight, I'll play bishop to d3. Oh well, it's true that my queen no longer defends the knight on d4. And this knight can become a target. It can be attacked by moves like bishop to c5 or knight to c6. We'll see. But for now, I'm developing my pieces. There's the semi-open d file in my favor versus the semi-open c file for my opponent. But my file is longer, I have more space. So he has to look for ways to break through, to try to create weaknesses. It's worth noting that if I push the b2 pawn to b3 at some point, the undefended knight on c3 will allow him to play b5, and I won't be able to capture because of the captures on the c3 knight. So I have to be very careful about protecting this c3 knight, which is lined up with his queen. He can also play moves like bishop to d6 to attack h2 and prevent me from castling short. It seems strange to put the bishop on d6, but I can't attack it right away. I don't have a knight on b5 to attack. I don't have an e5 pawn either. Each time he can capture. So a strange move like bishop to d6 is possible, along with bishop to b7, creating some pressure towards my kingside. There you go, he actually plays bishop to d6, and so if I castle kingside, he'll take on h2. Now, I could play g3, but that would weaken my kingside a bit. Sometimes he can also push his h-pawns, h1, h4 to try to open things up, to try to create weaknesses on g3. I could also bring my knight back to f3. But then I would have less control over the b5 square. But that's what I'm going to do anyway. Knight to f3, I come to defend h2. Also this push to e5, even if it's not possible right now, it could be a bit later. When I have a queen on e2 or a rook on the e-file, that push to e5 would be interesting. So he's putting pressure on the pawn on e4. By the way, I could play queen to e2 here to defend it a third time, and also threaten the e5 push myself. But you know what? After queen to e2, if I push e5 and he plays bishop takes knight, he'll be attacking my queen. But I could take his bishop and attack his queen, or I could also take his bishop and go after his rook over there. So queen to e2 is still a candidate move. In fact, I'm going to play it, queen to e2. Let's see how he reacts, because up until now, he's been putting under pressure. Let's see how he reacts when he's the one under pressure. He plays knight to c6 to control the e5 square. I castle kingside. And so there's a plan that works well when you have the Maroczy bind. It's to free up the c1 square to place a rook there, and then play the move knight to d5. You might think we're giving up the knight, but not really. Because after pawn takes, we recapture with a c-pawn, which will allow us to attack the knight on c6. And since the file opens up, the knight on c6 is pinned because the rook is lined up with the queen. So I'm going to try to move my bishop, put the rook on c1, and have this knight to d5 move, which will undoubtedly cause chaos in his position. The question is where to put my bishop, because if I play moves like bishop to e3, I'll get hit with knight to g4. I need to keep my dark squared bishop, because my pawn chain is mostly built on white squares. So the dark squared bishop provides a certain complementarity. That's not the bishop I want to give to my opponent. I don't want him to be able to trade his knight for my dark squared bishop. I could play bishop to g5, but he could attack me. Anyway, he plays knight to g4 here, so he's attacking the pawn on h2. He's also coming to control the e5 square. If I play h3, he can come into h2. After that, I can just move my rook, right? But he can also go to e5. But anyway, I'll have to respond to the attack on the pawn at h2. Alright, I'll play h3. And if knight goes to e5, maybe I won't react and will just play bishop to e3. To free up the a file, like I told you. My goal is to put the rook on the c file and look to play knight to d5 or knight to b5. He plays h5, so here he's setting a trap for me. Of course, if I take his knight, he recaptures, chases away my knight, opens the file, and if his bishop isn't there, he'll try to come in and checkmate. So it becomes very dangerous for me. I'm not going to take that risk. But now, where should I move my bishop? If I go to e3, he can exchange it. As I said, I don't want to. f4 isn't possible. If I go to g5, I'll get hit with the f6 push. That's pretty unpleasant. So maybe I'll just go to d2. It's an interesting position because he's showing a lot of aggression, playing very dynamically and tactically against my king, and you can't fall for the opponent's traps. I know I can take his knight, which could be interesting later on, but for now, it's too risky with the h file opening up, and my king doesn't have enough squares. So I'm connecting my rooks. I'll be able to put the rook on c1, maybe the other rook on d1, and at some point, knight to b5, knight to d5 will start to put him in trouble. As for the time, it's pretty even. We're both above 6 minutes. And as you can see for now, he's not castling because since the center isn't open, he doesn't have to castle right away. He's keeping both options open, kingside and queenside castling. But he doesn't want to castle kingside because he wants to direct the game against my king. He wants to bring the h pawn into play and the rook on h8 onto the file to attack my king. So if he's looking to castle, it will certainly be queenside, but for now he's not doing it. On bishop check, obviously I must not capture with a knight, otherwise the queen would recapture and deliver mate. But on bishop check, I'm not obliged to take. I can simply play king to h1. He takes on f3. What is he doing? He plays bishop takes a3. Let's imagine I take his bishop. I don't know whether with the pawn or with the rook. I'm not sure which is better, by the way, let's say with the rook. He plays knight to e5. Ah, no, he's going to play knight to d4. That's it, that's what he wants to do. So rook takes, he's going to play knight to d4. And if I take with the knight, queen to h2 is mate. So if I take knight to d4, he attacks the queen. If I move the queen, he takes the knight with check, I recapture, and he mates me on h2. Oh, what a combination he set up for me here. Let's think about this a bit. So I can't even trade the queen for several pieces because I might want to take the bishop when he plays knight to d4, take his knight, he takes the queen, I recapture. I still have 3 minor pieces, but each time after that, he recaptures with the h-pawn, he attacks my knight with that mate threat on h2, so I lose the piece. Because if I could trade my queen for 3 pieces, I would do it, that would still be interesting. But here, I just don't see it. So I still have this queen-king alignment. He hasn't castled all this time. And knight to d5, that was my idea with the rook on c1 to have the rook-queen alignment, but here I could have the queen-king alignment. So knight to d5, if he takes, I recapture with check, and I could eliminate his knight so it doesn't come to d4. So that's another way to take advantage of an alignment. I don't see any other moves anyway, so I'm going to play knight to d5. It's a very complicated position, as they often say, attack on the wing, reaction in the center. Since he hasn't castled, we're going to react in the center. And this sacrifice on d5, just like sometimes on f5, is thematic in Sicilians when there's a queen-king alignment. Or a rook-king alignment, sometimes it's the alignment with the rook. So he retreats with his queen, and if I take his bishop, he still has this move knight to d4. I don't have much time left now, I don't know what to do. I have bishop to f4 now with the knight protecting. Anyway, I don't have time, I have to play bishop to f4. Now, it's not even about whether I can get the advantage anymore. It's about survival. It's either I play this, or I get checkmated. It's impressive in this game how many pieces are hanging. His knight is hanging, so is mine, his bishop is hanging, his queen is under attack. I've rarely played such a dynamic and tactical game, especially since, as you know, I'm more of a positional player, so he plays bishop to d6. I really don't have much time. I think I'm going to exchange the bishops very quickly. But there will always be that threat of knight to d4. I don't know if I should play e5 right away, or if I should exchange the dark squared bishops first. And I don't have time, I'm going to play e5 right away. Unfortunately, I don't have time here. 12 seconds, he put too much pressure on me with his attacking moves. Let's exchange a few pieces. Oh, I can't make a move, I'm running out of time. A spectacular game where I managed to lose with a precision score roughly equal to my opponent's. I have 89% against 88 for my opponent. So let's look at the analysis of this game, because my opponent played in a very, very strong tactical and dynamic way. I played the pawn to e4, he responds with a Sicilian, c5, knight to f3 to support the d4 push, he plays e6, then I push d4, there's an exchange, I recapture with a knight, and then he plays a6, and I play the pawn to c4 to create what's called the Maroczy bind. It's the pawns on c4 and e4 that clamp down the d5 square to fight against the b5 and d5 pushes, and to gain a space advantage. My opponent plays queen to c7, knight to c3, knight to f6, and here I'm going to play pawn to a3. The computer suggests the move a3, even though in theory you often see bishop to e2, and in case of bishop to b4, the pin that threatens the pawn on e4, you could play f3, but that weakens the kingside defenses. Often, queen to d3 is played to protect the pawn on e4, but in this game I prefer the 3, which is also a playable move. The computer tells me that I have a slight advantage here. b6, I now place my bishop on d3, he plays his bishop to d6, and here the computer suggests the move h3, but I played knight to f3 to protect h2, to free up my play on the d-file, and why not, at the right moment, try to support the fork on e5. He places his bishop on b7, I put my queen on e2, with the threat of pushing e5, and he plays knight to c6 to control the square. I castle kingside, so I finished my development, almost done, and my idea is to develop the bishop to put the rook on c1 and play knight to d5 or knight to b5. With this rook-queen alignment, it has won me quite a few positions with this pawn structure. But here, he launches the attack, knight to g4, he attacks the h-pawn, I play h3, he plays h5, I can't take the knight. If I take the knight, he recaptures, my knight is attacked, and if I move my knight after that, it's a disaster. For example, let's imagine I play knight to e1, he'll play bishop to h2, check to force my king to h1, facing the rook, he can sacrifice his bishop with check, and then he'll checkmate me on h2. So I don't take his knight, and I play bishop to d2, freeing up the c1 square. There you go. My goal is to play rook to c1 and be able to play knight to b5 or knight to d5. And here, he surprises me. Here, he plays a move I absolutely did not see coming. He plays bishop takes a 3. I absolutely hadn't thought of this move. With the idea of playing knight to d4 to deflect my knight on f3 and threaten mate on h2. For example, if I take his bishop, I didn't do it, but if I take his bishop, plays knight to d4, and I can't take his knight because of mate, of course. And if I play the queen to d1, he'll eliminate my knight with check, and I can recapture however I want. Either way, he's going to mate me afterwards on h2. So he sacrifices his bishop. He's about to sacrifice his knight to checkmate me. I hadn't seen the combination. Actually, the computer says I'm better if I play knight to d5. So I play the only move that allows me to save myself. But the problem is, it's a sequence afterwards where I don't have control over all the moves. Knight to d5, I know that if he takes, I'm happy. If he takes, I recapture, attacking his knight with a check. Even if the knight comes to e7 to try to protect the king, I can then take his bishop. The problem is, he's never going to take my knight. He retreats to b8, and always keeps that threat of playing knight to d4. And here, the computer tells me that I should have played bishop to c3, so that my bishop controls the d4 square and attacks the g7 pawn. And at the same time, his bishop on a3 is still in danger. So here bishop to c3 would have allowed me to keep the advantage, but I don't find this move. I play bishop to f4, which is actually the logical continuation. When you put the knight on d5, the logical human follow-up is to play bishop to f4, with the knight providing protection to attack the queen and try to get out of trouble, also interrupting that attack along the diagonal. But it was bishop to c3 that was better according to the computer. It was the only move that allowed me to keep the advantage. I played bishop to f4, and he brings his bishop back to d6. And now I have very little time left. I can't find the right moves. I don't know whether I should exchange the bishops and then play e5, or if I should play e5 right away. I would need a lot of time to figure it out. In reality, the computer move is something I would never have found. It was to play the pawn to g3. So when I saw the computer's move, I thought, okay, on bishop takes, maybe it wants to recapture with the knight, but not even that on bishop takes. It says you should recapture with the pawn in this position. Leaving the knight on d5, you can see that black still can take because of the recapture, the attack from the knight, and the opening of the file. Plus, now the other knight is hanging, and the queen can't get to h2. But in the position after bishop takes, I would tend to want to recapture with the knight, but that doesn't even work. You have to recapture with a pawn, but here the continuation is too difficult for me. It's a computer line that's just too hard, where I can't get bishop to c3, I can't get g3. Here then, I played the pawn to e5. He takes with his knight. I don't even know if I exchanged the knight on e5. The computer says I should have played bishop takes, knight takes, bishop takes, and then take on b6. And I calculated this line at the moment I got there, but I didn't want to play it because I was afraid of bishop takes g2, which breaks up my kingside and wins back the knight. But in reality, he can't do that, because if he plays bishop takes g2, I can take, and if he takes the knight, I take on e5. So that means that in this position, he can't play bishop takes g2. In fact, the computer recommends that black play rook to s7. But I was convinced that black could play bishop takes g2, given how little time I had. I hadn't seen all the subtleties of the position, especially since we weren't quite there yet. We were here at the moment when I was about to push the pawn to e5. It's too hard. There was too much pressure in the game. My opponent was just too strong, both dynamically and tactically, against me. And he pulled off a combination on me that no one had ever done before. But actually, here, knight to d5 was very good for me. It frees up the c3 square in addition to attacking the queen. We're not afraid of the capture, because I attack the knight afterwards by opening the file. But above all, I free up the c3 square. That's what I didn't understand. Actually, when the queen comes to b8, I should have put the bishop on c3 to control the d4 square so the knight can't approach anymore, to have influence on the diagonal, and always keep the bishop under threat. But I played bishop to f4, bishop to d6, and the problems persisted in the position. I was still facing threats along the diagonal and the possibility of knight to d4, and I couldn't get out of it. With the move e5, I could have kept playing, but I ran out of time. So I tried to look for other Grandmaster games on this theme. I didn't find exactly the same theme, but I did find some similar ones. Here, I want to show you this game by Grandmaster Florian Jenny playing white, facing Grandmaster Christian Bauer with black. And in this position, black plays h5. Does that remind you of anything? It's to support the knight coming to g4, with a queen threatening mate on h2. And here, the player with white, the Grandmaster with white, plays knight to d5. He's trying to take advantage of the queen-king alignment, obviously because if the knight is taken, you recapture with an attack on the bishop and open the file to check the black king. But black plays knight to g4, threatening mate on h2. Bishop to f4. This should remind you of something: the knight defends the bishop, which counterattacks the queen, but the bishop comes back to d6, bishop takes, queen takes. Here the computer says you should play g3, but the player with the white pieces played f4, which is going to weaken this diagonal, and that will be fatal for him at some point. Then pawn takes, check, but the king finds safety on a dark square. Then pawn takes on c6, rook to e8, attacking the queen, which moves to f3, and then we recapture. And here, the problem for white is that the light squared bishop doesn't really have any play, whereas the knight will be able to support attacks on the dark squares. In fact, there's a threat of the rook coming into e3, supported by the knight, so the bishop retreats preemptively. Rook to h6, the rook comes out and gets involved in the fight on h6, on the dark square. King to h1, trying to shield itself from attacks along the diagonal, but that won't be enough. The rook moves to e3, the queen comes to d1, looking to exchange queens, but the black queen declines the exchange and goes to f6, controlling d8 and seeking new routes to attack on the dark squares. Queen to d2, putting pressure on the rook, but queen to h4 threatens mate. If you play g3, everything is taken because the h2 pawn is pinned. So h3 was played, but that continues to weaken the dark squares. We come into g3, threatening mate on h2. After pawn takes, check. The king went to g1, queen to h2, king to f2, queen takes f4, king to g1, queen to h2, king to f2, and rook to f3 finally forces resignation as the g2 pawn is pinned. There is no escape for the king, he's going to get checkmated. For example, if the king goes to e1, queen to g3 check. If you block with the queen, you lose the queen. If you block with the rook, rook to h1 will come and it will be disastrous for white. And then what else can you even play? If you play king to d1, you lose the rook immediately. If you play king to e2, you lose the pawn with a mating attack. There's no way to avoid checkmate. So I also found this game instructive because, when I lose a game, I try to look for reference games with similar themes to see how I could have played, and sometimes I come across other very interesting games as well. I wanted to show you this one, which was quite beautiful in terms of the mating attack on the white king. Well, I hope this video was instructive and entertaining, and we'll meet again soon for new adventures on the chessboard. Goodbye everyone.